Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank. I'm sorry, I wrote my paper in English, so I'm going to speak in English. I wish to thank the organizers of this event, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, and the Interamerican Institute for Democracy for their kind invitation. Okay, so I'm going to have an overview of what the terms, the concepts of left and right meant in the late 18th century, how this political geometry originated, then how it evolved throughout the 19th century into the 20th century, and then I'll finally ponder about what it means in the early 21st century. Okay, I'd say that's, well, what has been said before me. In the early days, the terms left and right sprung from the seating positions of the deputies at the 1789 French National Assembly, the parliament that France convened after the French Revolution to write a new constitution. Simply put, the deputies who favored the continuity of the royal veto sat at the right of the assembly, and those who opposed it sat at the left. Those spatial images would become in time metaphors of political positions. Hence, we may say that the use of left and right as political adjectives is traced back as early as the late 1790s in Europe. They came to mean, respectively, on the one hand, a commitment to freedom, equality, fraternity, progress, reform, and internationalism, whereas the right was commonly associated to an emphasis on notions such as authority, hierarchy, order, duty, tradition, reaction, and nationalism. During the early 19th century, liberalism became the dominant current of progressive politics, usually associated to, well, the left in the early 19th century. English liberalism, with its tenets of political and economic freedom, became the dominant ideology and the dominant ideology of and driving force for the British Empire. Other forms of liberalism, such as the one that emerged in the Hispanic world between the Napoleonic invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in 1808 and the promulgation of the Cadiz Constitution of 1812, never quite took off, sadly, although many would say that liberalism originated in the Spanish-speaking world rather than in the English-speaking world. Conversely, the rise of Romanticism in Germany bred counter-Enlightenment ideas and stances, such as those espoused by Johann Gottfried Herder, Joseph de Maistre, and Edmund Burke, among others. These thinkers sternly condemned the Enlightenment ideas for having fostered the violence and terror of the French Revolution, as shown by Robespierre and their ilk. Amidst the revolutions of 1848 came the specter that would haunt Europe, the ghost of communism as proposed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and according to their manifesto of the Communist Party. Moreover, they prophesied, the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workmen of all countries, unite. This menace would almost materialize in 1871 after France's defeat by Prussia in 1871, when the Paris Commune rose, before being bloodily suppressed shortly after by Adolphe Thiers. 4.5 decades later, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 opened a new chapter in the popular usage of the terms left and right. It also caused a split within the left, between those who believed in a peaceful, gradual, and democratic path to socialism, hence called social democrats, and those who professed the violent totalitarian view of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who considered the working class unwise enough to know what suited it better, accordingly putting it under the tutelage of a full-time revolutionary vanguard, the totalitarian party. That would be inspiration and precursor both of right-wing fascist parties and, well, and National Socialism by extension, and Stalinist parties alike. Thus, a totalitarian left would hunt, together with a totalitarian right, a democratic world along the 20th century, and hunted and confronted a democratic left, demeaning it as revisionist and treacherous. In a well-known episode, the German communists of the KPD, of the Communist Party of Germany, urged on by their Soviet masters, derogatively dubbed social democrats as social fascists, in a deliberate effort to smear and equate them to the Nazis in the eyes of the German working class. In the end, the tragic division of the German left, sponsored by the Comintern, paved the way for Hitler's rise to power in 1933. Likewise, when we speak of the Spanish Civil War, we tend to band together or pit nationalists on the one hand and Republicans, as if they were both solid blocks. They were not. In the case of the so-called Spanish left, it is well known that the Spanish communists bloodily repressed the anarchists, the socialists, and the POUM, Trotskyites, and other Republican parties. So we may, it is known that there was a civil war within the civil war in the Republican side, which questions the use of the term left in this precise episode. The Wall Street crash of the fall of 1929 and the economic depression that followed precipitated a discredit of liberal democracy in the eyes of many. Bolshevism and National Socialism became, in the eyes of vast sectors of public opinion, as waves of the future, so to speak, that could transcend what millions of people back then perceived as sterile parliamentarian gridlock. The rivalry between those two totalitarian ideologies gave rise in turn to what the German historian Ernst Nolte termed as the European Civil War, which raged from 1917 to 1945 with the liberal democracies in the sidelines. Different authors have claimed that the defeat of the, from the ashes of Hitler's bunker and the ensuing occupation of Germany by the Allied forces emerged a new divide between these former allies, the Cold War, the antagonism of two competing blocs which vied in the economic, political, military, sportive, and even interplanetary domains for over 4 long decades. For a brief while, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the demise of the Eastern Bloc, liberals heralded, perhaps prematurely, the end of history in Hegelian terms, stating that mankind had reached its final point of ideological evolution with the universalization of Western liberal democracy and free trade globalization. In terms of hegemony, various pundits trumpeted the rise of unilateralism and a new century of American hegemony. This was not to be. The terrorist attacks of 2001 in the United States, the 2004 train bombings in Madrid, the London bombings of 2005, the Paris terrorist attacks of 2015, put on view a new and deadly ideology, radical Islamism, which, unlike left or right, had no Western roots, was incomprehensible in Western terms, and posed an unprecedented threat to both left and right. The global financial economic crisis of 2007-2008 brought again in disrepute liberalism and established political parties and discredited political parties from the center left and center right alike, provoking an upsurge of anti-politics everywhere. This was reflected in the widespread coming into power of authoritarian leaders and strongmen as Vladimir Putin, Erdogan, Viktor Orban, Narendra Modi, Donald Trump, which may not be classified neither as rightists nor as leftists. Okay, I'm going to hurry up, sorry for... it's difficult to consider, I mean, are these late 17th century categories still valid in the first quarter of the 21st century? Can we really classify Mexico's Andrés Manuel López Obrador as a leftist with his wild enthusiasm for militarization, his obsession with economic austerity, or his keenness for religious discourse? Is it possible to consider Vladimir Putin, head of an oligarchic clique of crony capitalists, a true heir to the mantle of the so-called workers' paradise? Take Miguel Díaz-Canel, a run-of-the-mill bureaucrat devoid of any charisma or revolutionary zeal. Is it possible to term him a leftist without blushing? Would not he resemble far more a Leonidas Trujillo, a Papadoc, or even a Tacho Somoza, for that matter? Same case with Daniel Ortega, who, after having perpetuated himself in power for decades on end, has come to represent the quintessential banana republic dictator. Consider contrary-wise Jeremy Corbyn, a self-proclaimed socialist who advocates dated statist solutions to economic issues and yet does not feel embarrassed of having been half-hearted about Britain's continued membership in the EU, or worse still, proclaiming dubious anti-Semitic opinions and brittle. Or for that matter, Jean-Luc Mélenchon or Pablo Iglesias, who also have expressed without remorse authoritarian, bigoted, or plainly racist views. I would like to end my presentation by saying that rather than speaking in terms of left and right, we should now speak in terms of cosmopolitans versus ultranationalists, globalists versus patriots, internationalists versus protectionists. Those who have exploited, both in the left and the right, the resentment of the little man who has been left behind by globalization. Thank you very much.